When my kids were little, we had this deep, natural connection. I mean, like all little kids, they depended on me for everything. But it went beyond that. They actually liked to be with me, to hang out together. We'd play together, they'd sit in my lap and I'd read them a book. We'd roll around on the floor together. They would tell me stories and I would listen. We just liked to be together, and it seemed like even being in the same room was enough. Spending time together seemed to really fill them up. And to be honest, it filled me up too. Now as they've gotten older, a disturbing pattern has developed. Now when they come to me, it's almost always because they want something. Dad, can I have some money for the t-shirt they're selling at my school? Dad, I need some new shoes for basketball. Dad, can you drive me and my friends to the movies and then pick us up afterwards at midnight? I started to feel like all I was to them was an ATM machine. More than anything, I wish my kids would just come and ask me to hang out. You know, like go to a movie together, or sit down and have lunch together, or just sit down and talk, or even play. That would make me feel good. I would feel more valuable as a person than someone they just came to when they needed something. I long to feel that deep connection like when they were little, when spending time together filled us both up. My guess, God often feels the same way. When we first discover Him, when everything's new, we just want to spend time with Him. God's presence fills us up. When we're praying, it's like we're hanging out with our Savior. But that feeling fades. We find other ways to fill our time, and prayer becomes something else. Eventually, we only go to God and pray when we need something from Him, which is exactly why the spiritual discipline of prayer is so important. Even though most of us pray and think we know how to pray, this spiritual discipline treats prayer differently. It shows us a richer, fuller, more meaningful kind of prayer. A kind of prayer that connects us deeply with our Father and Savior. For most of us, the word prayer has been flattened into one definition. The duration and content of our prayers change slightly, but for the most part, our prayers really all look the same. And that's really too bad, because when you see the word prayer in the English translation of the Bible, it's actually many different words with many different definitions in the ancient language. Biblical words that we've translated as prayer actually mean things like to bow down, to cry out, to question, to lodge a complaint, to praise, to ask, to wish, to fall on your face. The spiritual discipline of prayer asks us to examine and practice prayer in all its different forms. And maybe the best way to encounter these new definitions of prayer is the most obvious, through Jesus. Throughout His time on earth, Jesus modeled a deep, meaningful life of prayer. 8 times in the Gospel, the writers give us a description of how Jesus prayed. In Matthew, we read that Jesus dismissed the crowds and His disciples and went up on a mountainside by Himself to pray. Mark tells us Jesus got up early in the morning while it was still dark and went to a solitary place and prayed. Luke tells us that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray. Jesus understood the importance of being face to face with His Father so that He could live life bathed in God's presence. Maybe that's the biggest thing missing from our prayer lives today. Maybe we need to recapture the idea of living near our Father, in constant relationship and communion with Him. James says it this way: draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. Maybe the difference between our prayers and Jesus' prayers isn't obvious right away. So maybe it's helpful to think about the difference this way. We're often really good at seeking God's hand and not so good at seeking His face. The spiritual discipline of prayer gives us a chance to seek God's face in the same way that Jesus did. For many of us, the biggest problem is we're just too shy about it. Even if we want to seek God's face, even if we want to experience His presence, we just aren't bold enough to ask. It seems weird. Maybe we think it's asking too much of God. Or maybe we don't believe He'll really show up. It reminds me of playing hide and seek with my kids when they were little. It was a little unusual because they were too afraid to hide, so they would let me hide and they'd all come looking for me. So I'd go find a spot to hide. They would go down in the family room and they would count. Then I'd hear them coming up the stairs. And they'd look and they'd look and they'd look. And when they couldn't find me, they'd start to panic, thinking, oh my goodness, his dad left the house. Then my second oldest daughter, Lena, she would quiet everyone down. Shh. She'd go, Daddy, make a noise. Daddy, make a noise. So I'd like tap on the wall. They go, hear that, hear that. And they'll stumble down the hall into the next room, and then I hear them looking around, looking around, looking around. Then the panic would set in again. And she'd, shh. Daddy, make another noise. Make another noise. And then I'd start a homing signal. I'd be like, boop, boop, boop. And they'd come around the hall, they'd find me. And when they did, it was a huge celebration. My kids sought after me and asked me to show them the way. And because they did, they found me. And that's what prayer is. Or at least, that's what prayer should be. Us, God's children, seeking Him with everything we've got and boldly asking Him to show up. Do you ever feel like God's presence is missing from your life? Try practicing the spiritual discipline of prayer. Real prayer. Pray boldly like Jesus did and seek God's face. You will find Him. And when you do, it will fill both of you up.